In this episode of Quakers Today, we consider the question, how do we balance peace and protest?
You'll hear about Richard Rohr's new book, The Tears of Things. He offers a look at prophetic wisdom, where anger and injustice can mature into grief and then into action.
Jade Rockwell shares a vision for Quakers and other faith communities in these troubling times.
And we hear a powerful prophetic message from Australia. Greg Rolls tells us about his experiences with nonviolent direct action. In an age of climate collapse and colonial violence, what does it mean to be faithfully disobedient? I'm Sweet Miche.
And I'm Peterson Toscano. This is Season 5, Episode 1 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation. This season of Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee and Friends Fiduciary. Hello, and thank you for joining Sweet Miche and me for the premiere of Season 5 of Quakers Today. This season, we're introducing a new feature for you, a video version of the podcast.
And you might be thinking, but it's a podcast. Why do you need video?
Yeah, as an audiophile, I wondered the same thing, but turns out more and more people are enjoying their favorite podcasts in the form of YouTube videos. So we're going to continue to produce a high quality, edited and polished audio version with all the bells and whistles, and we'll provide you with a longer, loosely edited video.
This actually solves a problem we've faced in the last 4 seasons. Our guests have a lot to share, but we end up cutting a lot to keep our podcast under 30 minutes. The video version gives us more space for the guests, and you get to see our facial expressions and that weird purple halo thing hovering above Peterson's head.
It helps me to achieve that studio sound.
It's adorable. And you'll find the extended video version of this podcast on the Friends Journal YouTube channel. And we'll have a link for it in our show notes at quakerstoday.org.
Now, today's show comes at a time when many people are asking, how do I respond to the multiple crises happening in my country and the world around me?
Yeah, we go deep today, and we hope you walk away with greater clarity and direction. It won't all be heavy, though. Joy is a part of our resistance.
We're going to end the show with Quaker terms. We Quakers have this whole vocabulary that can sound bizarre to newcomers. Personally, I'm a fan of the phrase, I'll let the silence speak for me. Depending on how you say it, the phrase sounds profound or snarky.
Definitely. I've heard it used both ways. I like the Quaker use of the phrase holding something in the light, a person, a concern, a difficult truth. And that idea of holding connects so well with our episode today. We're going to be talking with people who are holding the grief of the world, the anger of injustice, and the hope for a better future all at the same time.
Yes, people like Australian Quaker Greg Rolls. Sweet Miche, you spoke to Greg for almost an hour about direct nonviolent activism. The authorities arrested Greg over 25 times for his disruptive activism, including actions with Blockade Australia. This is a network established to address global environmental destruction. In the world of social change movements, Greg is known as a rebel who employs nonviolent tactics. He believes these actions are working. For the September 2025 issue of Friends Journal, he wrote the article, We're Having an Effect, the Necessity of Spiritual Resistance in Climate Change and Justice Activism.
Greg read part of his article for me and shared some experiences of activism and arrests. He offered a strong critique of Quakers and Quaker meetings that talk a lot about peace and justice, but act passively. He criticized the tendency for contemporary middle-class Quakers to outsource their activism to professionals. His words are prophetic.
And, like with most prophets, Greg's words will provoke, offend, and challenge some of you. That's basically the job of a prophet.
My name's Greg Rolls, and I just want to acknowledge that I am talking today on the lands of the Yuritja people in Gimwe, so-called Cairns, and this land is stolen and there was no treaty signed and nothing ever ceded, so this is still First Nations land. And I also just want to acknowledge my Auntie Carol Kirk, who's an elder in my life, who considers me one of her mob, and I have to tell people that because she rides me if I don't. So thanks, Auntie Carol. Big shout out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no worries. She deserves it all. It's all good.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about myself also. I'm also a climate activist. I work at Quaker Earth Care Witness, which is mostly a North American Quaker environmental earth care org. But I also love to do as much direct action as I can. I have not racked up the amount of arrests you have, but someday hope to be
I
there.
think it's hard. It's harder in the US. Like if I did what I did in the US, I'd be in jail for life now. Like Australia, so called, it just has more of a I don't know, more of a history of like the judiciary being a little bit easier on activists. So you
Yeah,
do get out, which
yeah,
also gives us more responsibility, right? But yes, so no, I think
yeah.
I would struggle in the States if I was. I'd probably still do some stuff, but I would not be as, like I wouldn't be as free as
No,
I am now. Free,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
right.
But thanks for telling me. Yeah.
Yeah,
Appreciate the work you do. Appreciate the work you do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate the work you do. But do you have your article
Yeah.
up?
The point of the parable of the talents is that it is better to lose everything than not to risk anything at all. Only action leads to the fruits of the Spirit. Police have raided places where I live 3 times. Angry magistrates have condemned me and sworn to make an example of my behaviour so that others will not follow. People lodged in the system of violent privilege only react this way when there is an effect, when there is a fear of an ongoing effect in which more people are involved. The parable of talents shows us that we need to put a foot forward in order for the light to show us where to go next. The climate crisis is overwhelming. Friends have descended from a spiritual lineage that thrives in the overwhelming and stagnates in the comfortable. This is not to say we seek to be overwhelmed or to do too much, simply that when the world at large seems overwhelming, it can be easy to trust in the light and let it guide our steps. For far too long, we have not taken steps on this journey, concerning ourselves more with the ways of the world than with the calling of the light. The world is a scary and distracting place. Worries about respectability and money can keep us passive. We have professional lobbyists who tell us to keep calm and just keep paying our bills and their wages. But then there's the light. The light that made Quaker founder George Fox walk away from his home life and into the fields against all common sense. That made many more of our ancestors walk knowingly into danger, imprisonment and death to keep the Quaker witness in the public eye and the truth available to all. Without those friends risking their talents, we would have no society and no teachings to learn from. If people from our spiritual ancestry had considered the best practical use of their time, they would have stayed at home and buried their talents. If we rest in our comfortable lives, there will be no descendants to pass our spiritual gifts on to. We only need to move. Sitting this one out is to bury our talents.
Do you want to summarize the parable of the talents and why this feels so aligned with your work?
Yeah. This was things I was thinking about because the Westminster raid and seeing that young activists say, they're raiding us and being so violent because we are having an effect. At the time, I was staying with some elderly capital F friends, and by elderly I mean wise and leadery. And they, hi David, hi Trish, and every day, like David's a particularly likes to do a lot of sitting and stillness and things that I need more of in my own spiritual practice that I don't do enough of. And he has this book, I think it's called Wisdom and the Light, and has a little Bible passage each day. And on this particular day, when I'd heard about the raid, the reading from this book was the parable of the talents. And the Bible passage is insert Bible passage here, which I can remember and get to you later. But basically, Jesus tells the story of a master, a really rich man who goes away and gives 3 of his workers talent, like money. Let's modern terms it, some money to invest and look after him. And then he goes away somewhere, and the first one, invests it, gets 5 times their money back, and is like, great. The second one invests it and gets double their money back, and the third one they're really worried about the money, so they go and bury it in the backyard, and they're like, okay, cool. Anyway, then the master comes back and he's like, cool, how'd you go with your work? And the first two pull out their money and they're like, look at my stock index, it's amazing. And the master's like, great, you're amazing, well done. And the third one goes, hi, hey, I kept it safe, here's the same amount you gave me back to you. And the master excommunicates him, kicks him out of the garden, like kills him, because he didn't take risk with his talents, because he took another way to put that is, it's when you take what the light or God gives you and you don't act on it, you bury it, you keep it safe. And whereas the first two, they took risks with it. They risked losing it all. And in my article, I talk about how it's kind of sad in that parable that, they didn't lose everything in their investments to see how the master responded. But I think the point is that when you engage with the problems of our time, colonialism, violence, state violence, all the big oppressive things which are causing us harm, you can't lose when you move. Even if you might lose your worldly wealth, even if you might lose your status and your respectability. And, I know in Quakers Australia, I'm considered a bit of an annoying, person, but that's worth it because I get to live to the talents that was given to me. So I don't know, other than as we face climate and colonial crises, we have to invest our talents in change. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything. So a good answer.
That was great.
Thanks,
And
Miche.
it reminds me a little bit of like the story of the prodigal son, where like it's it's not as a direct of money thing, but it's like, he leaves and then, comes back, and the father is so celebratory of him coming back.
Yeah.
And it feels like, if you play it safe, you're not the
Yeah,
prodigal
you're going to
son.
starve in another country. And we're turning Earth into another country away from creation the way it was made in balance and meant to be. And we're going to starve to death in that unless we return to source and be like, actually, we've got to remember LORE, the old law of how to look after land and look after each other. And I think that's the call. And that's what we as prodigal children of the Creator need to remember. How's that? That's a good analogy.
What was the spark of writing this? Was it the Westminster raid, or was it your arrest, or what was the kind of spark?
I think this is something that I've sat with a long time. And I know when the Westminster raid happened, a lot of friends in Australia became more interested. And I just wanted you to use that to push more this thing that I've been saying to particularly friends on this continent for a long time, that we need to be more active and live in our non-violent witness. Peace is not simply, we have this big peace testimony and friends love to talk about peace, but peace is not the same as passivity. And we think that peace is about being polite and nice and being quiet in public spaces. And there's a place for that. But what peace is it's proactive, and it calls us to take action and to take a risk. So anytime that something gets the news or piques friends' interest, I think for a lot of friends in so-called Australia, I sort of bang on like an old record. I'm friendly, I love the society, and I'm critical of the way we middle class and professionalize our activism. But it heads with people in loving ways about the way we use our resources to uphold sort of more middle class things, whilst activists live in cars and struggle. So any opportunity where there's media I get, I try and push Australian friends, but also I would encourage friends anywhere in the West in particular to think about what life really means and how to live in the moment in spirit. It's scary, it's hard, because everything in the world teaches us to be safe and comfortable and respectable. But that's not why I became a Quaker or joined Quakers. I think that's what inspired me to write it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's a really common thread with my Quaker contemporaries as well, is that feeling of frustration of like, come on, guys, this faith, as you were talking about George Fox walking into the fields against all common sense. It's like, this faith was not started to be respectable.
Yeah.
In fact, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
But we've become comfortable.
Yeah. I think it's easy for us to be comfortable in the West, particularly people with white skin. And the problem is not so much comfort. I think that's a whole separate thing about how comfort can sort of sap our spiritual energy, but also about, I think the other side of that is respectability. It's like looking good in the eyes of society, when because we think that will give us more say or something, or more power or more speak or more sort of safety. But it actually destroys our safety, as we're seeing with the poly crisis, which is the climate crisis, etc. Like, it takes away our respectability because we're Quakers, because Quakers were rebellious, and that's who we were. And it's okay to say there's a small percentage of Quakers who go out and do that work, but I don't think we're meeting that quota. Back during the English Civil War, when they were out preaching or against slavery, when eventually Quakers got on board with abolishing that, there was still like a percentage who would go out and be supported. I don't think we have anywhere near that right now. Like, at the moment, we're just happy to pay people to do professional jobs, and that's, like, to me, that's kind of a paradox of what Quakers used to be. That's not a great word, but yeah, it'll do.
Yeah.
Right, me too. Like, I don't want to do any of this. Like, I would like a
Right.
respectable job. I would love a home. Like, I'm staying at a friend's place at the moment who's putting me up, and it's very nice. But I'm effectively homeless or home free, and it's hard. It's really hard. But uh, again, it's like, what are we supposed to do? Particularly, and the climate crisis, and watching the genocide in Gaza, the war in West Papua, and what's happening in Sudan. This is all from Western consumption, and Quakers in the West, I feel, we're just not answering that call. Like, I've often said, we should just go sit in the driveways of the war makers until they send us to jail and see. And I get people who sort of say, well, that won't have an effect. Well, maybe not, but is faithfulness about effect? Is our values about effect, or is it about our integrity? And that's what is the meaning of life sort of comes out in. Yeah.
I was really drawn to your analysis of like the if we are in the streets, are we blocking ambulances? And I think that's something that, like, when I'm planning a direct action, in a lot of ways, I try to be as least disruptive as
Yeah.
possible. Even though, of course, that's not like, of course, I'm trying to disrupt. Like, that's the whole point. But I'm also trying to
Mm.
not disrupt. And I'm like interested in your analysis that actually, like, the ambulances are fine.
Maybe
If you
maybe
want to,
even
yeah.
better. Maybe even better. It's hard to get data on, but there's been some studies in the UK. There was a famous case here, and because some Australian friends might watch this, and it made a big news. There were people not connected to Quakers or Friends, but they blocked a very major bridge in our largest city, Melbourne. And there was a case of a woman had to give birth on the side of the road. But when you look into that case, they were in a car and they wanted to get to a particular hospital. So even though they were told to go to another hospital closer, they tried to go the long way around. But the data suggests, because roads are closed all the time for all sorts of reasons, whether that's public events or road crashes, and cities are built to carry cars, which is a really unfortunate aspect of our society. But ambulances do have plans and they can get around things. And in some studies are suggesting they actually get to hospitals faster because of the way we shut routes down. And also, I'll just touch on, the study that came out of Yale University this year, which said that, in areas where you've had higher traffic disruption, you get higher Greens votes. And in Australia, so-called, we just had a federal election a few months ago where our left-leaning Labor government got voted back in with a huge majority, when people were scared we might go a little bit, like the States, a little bit Trump. And people have said, oh, that's nice, and Australia still has it. And I would argue that's because we've had a really strong current of radical protesting on this continent, including Blockade Australia, who I've been heavily involved in, and some of the XR groups that have been around. So I would say supporting those and keeping those, if you want to keep some kind of sanity in this so-called democratic system, you have to keep the climate crisis in the conscience. And we have a whole media system built to erase that or not talk about it or keep us worried about everyday consumption. So we have to take these risks to maintain some stability, even if the ship is going down. Yeah.
Gosh, okay. I feel like a lot of climate groups are being like, okay, we need to shift our focus or like really be in solidarity with, which I think you talk a lot about said the poly crisis, I think is the word you used.
Yeah.
And like, I see that too. Like everything is connected, right? But
Yeah.
I'm also really struggling with climate groups where I'm like, you're losing the thread. Like you're losing the if we don't have a planet to live on, why are we even fighting for the people on the planet?
Definitely.
Like, and of course that's a glib way to say it, but I'm interested in maybe how you hold all of it, and like
Yeah.
still why climate is the central thing for you.
I mean, that's a really hard question. And that's where I think it feels overwhelming, because it is all interconnected. For me, I see this like the problem is colonialism, which is, one group of people, white Europeans, taking over masses of the earth, killing anyone who resists or gets in the way, and turning country, as we call First Nations people in Australia, we live on country, country looks after us, we look after country, but turning country into an asset. And that gets converted into money, which is then accumulated by fewer and fewer people. So that's the core problem. And from that, you have these multifaceted things. So, for instance, I know in the States, originally that was land where Latinx people lived, but you've also got a lot of people coming from further south, and a lot of that is caused by food shortages and water shortages due to the climate crisis. So it's creating refugees who are then flooding into the States because the rich in the US have stolen everything and destroyed the environment along the way. So, it is connected. And I think, I don't have an answer to all of our problems. That's why I wrote the article. It's about what is the light telling me to do now, and I think the main problem, particularly for Quakers and other people of faith, is that we just kind of get overwhelmed and we go into our own worlds where it's about, I think for a lot of Quakers, it's about retirement and how I can do activism stuff that's respectable, that the wider society will like, oh, I wrote letters and isn't that nice? Whereas what the light is calling us to do is to witness and get in the way of these things, a real non-violent force. So again, I'm compelled. I just wrote a poem the other day called "Why Don't We Just Sit in the Driveways?" because I'm a bit like, we're having all these massive protests for Palestine, and Palestine rightly has captured the zeitgeist of the activist and resistance movement. The US, obviously is funding that. So the Australian government also funds it, and a lot of our tax dollars go to it. So that's bringing awareness to that crisis. At the same time, just above Australia, there's a country called West Papua, which is having its rainforests cleared and its land destroyed, paid for by the Australian government and US oil companies. And this is all adding to the climate crisis. So I think it's about literally trying to stick our faith stick into the spoke of the wheel that's crushing us. How we do that, I don't know, but that's why we're people of faith. And I think it's about building community and action as we go, rather than what we're doing now in the West, which is stagnating and trusting in the middle class, sort of ways of paying people off to do things, which is part of the problem and upholds the problem, in my opinion, rather than actually does anything about it. Yeah, that's not an answer.
No, no, it's good. It also is making me rethink like my career,
Oh,
but
no, no.
it's good. No, no, no. I know that, but it's just, yeah, the
Yeah,
nonprofit of it all
the
is hard.
non-profit,
Like it
the
is
non
it
the non-profit sector. Yeah, industrialization complex. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
really hard.
yeah, yeah. I'm like,
Yeah,
ah yes. Yeah.
sorry.
No, this is great. Thank you. So, thinking about you've gotten arrested 28 times. It's a lot of moments of arrest. What goes through your mind like each time that happens? I'm sure you've mostly planned for it. I'm sure sometimes you've not.
Yeah.
How are those like different, and also how do you find spiritual grounding in those moments? And yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the Wachowski sisters who said it's the difference between knowing and doing, which I'm sure came from some spiritual text that they ripped off and put into the Matrix. Sorry to quote the Matrix in the Quaker interview, but the light reveals itself in many ways. But it is like, how do you find, once you decide you're going to do something, the spiritual grounding is in the doing. And that can take many forms. There was a time where I think I'm okay to talk about this now. I don't think anyone will care. But there was a time where I was physically and sexually tortured by some members of the Australian Defence Force whilst doing a protest. Sorry, I should have treated more than that. And at the
No, it's okay.
time, I went through a moment of, it probably lasted maximum half an hour. The time it felt like, days or something. Um, at the time, I remember just like leaving my kind of body, like not in a spiritual way, but just my brain sort of went away. And then my cognitive thoughts were just like, oh God, this is what we're doing to people all across the world and we'll never know about it. Like they're doing this to people in Afghanistan, they're doing this to people in Sudan and the Congo. This is what special forces do. And we're still thinking of them as the good guys. So I think that gave me extreme empathy in the moment it was happening. People like, how did you survive that? I'm like, I was thinking of others. I don't know. As for the other arrests, like mostly what I've done in the last sort of 5-6 years has been well planned. Obviously, I talk in the article about a couple of times where we weren't expecting it. Two of the times were raids, and you don't expect that or feel comfortable about that. But I'm a person of incredible privilege. I'm light skinned. I'm on this continent that's still so much wealth. And honestly, what else spiritually can I do but try to stand up for life? So when the stuff hits the fan, you are all about, hey, I've done what I can. So for me, that's what spiritual is. You know, one time when we were raiding Colo, we're in the bush, and that was really nice. There was no, I just felt like I had no, like the ancestors were with us, and I had no fear. The house raid was a bit scarier because we were living in a house full of vulnerable people. We had a bunch of refugees from Papua New Guinea, and because the police who raided us were plain clothed, and the Papua New Guineans didn't have great English, they thought we were being raided by criminals. So even though the police had us all, you know, in the lounge room, there was about 15 of us in the lounge room. One of the people had their phones. They were told, "Don't touch your phones," but they bravely, I found out later, had their phone under the pillow, trying to call 000, trying to call the police, not realizing that it was the police because they
Oh
were so
no.
scared. Yeah, yeah. So in that case, I was more like, I'm not going to give my phone and computer to the police easily because they were. The biggest charge I got for that was not unlocking my devices, which, you know, the magistrate was very angry about.
That's a
But
charge?
yeah, because they had a warrant. They had a warrant to unlock the phone, and that's the most serious charge I've in all my arrests. That's the most, because that became like a more heavy criminal one. So my thing was, I'm not giving them, because I knew they were there for us going into the weapons factories in Brisbane. So I was like, I'm not going to unlock that because they're probably looking for more people. Eventually they'll get onto it, but I can buy time. And so I was refusing, but I was also just worried about the people we had in the house at the time. And I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. You know, I knew I was going to the watch house, to the police station, but I just wanted to end it. And that was my main thing in that arrest. And then once you're in the watch house, you know, it was crowded, it was full of criminals. And again, like my spiritual grounding was like, sometimes you might be like, oh, this is really hard. What am I doing? But one of the things that, I don't know if this happens in the States, and I'm so sorry for talking so much, but we had in Australia, they actually locked children up in the watch houses. So, and the watch houses are the worst places. Like anyone who's been, I've only been to the watch house, I haven't been past that to remand or jail. But people tell me the watch houses are the worst. And I say that just to talk about this point that when I went in there, there was a cell of 14 or 15-year-old kids who were locked in one cell away from us. But, you know, and I had to say to the police, you know, what are you doing? These are kids, locking them up. Like, what do you expect from these kids? And, you know, it was horrible. So again, I'm just like thinking about my privilege and how lucky I am. And, you know, I know you know, I've got a van to live in when I get out and all these sorts of things. And those kids, you know, these First Nations kids are just going to continue to be, you know, suffer the violence of the state. And so that's, I don't want to say that, like, I'm not a hero or selfless or anything, but my spirituality has always been about interconnectedness and my place in the whole. And I've been on that journey for sort of 10 years rather than thinking about, I don't know, what do Western Christians think about, like going to heaven or good and bad or whatever. Like, I just think about the violence and the evil in the here and now and how I can just sit against that, really. You know, when it gets hard, take a break, but also sometimes you feel like you're compelled and you have to go again. I
Yeah.
don't know how people sit by and watch it, to be
Well,
honest. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it is. It's hard to see people sit by. Uh,
Yes.
How do you feel like your I don't know if like your like Quaker meeting is important to you or like your if you have like a Quaker community that is like with you in a lot of this, either spiritually or physically or
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because, like I said, I think I'm a bit of a broken record sometimes, always. But in that, I've developed deep connections and friendships with elder friends as well, in particular. I mean, they support me financially. I only have a van because a friend bought it for me. That's the only reason I've got somewhere to sleep most nights. And that's just from relationship and doing things together and sitting in worship together. For those in the States who and otherwhere, you know, the population of so-called Australia is about, it's a bit smaller than the size of New York, but we're spread out over the size, you know, the size of the United States. So just because of numbers, where I am now,
uh-huh.
there's not a lot of Quakers, and I am further from my meeting house than, you know, I'm about 2,000 kilometers from my main meeting house at the moment. Just because I came up here, but yes, I still have friends in the area who host me from time to time, which is really lovely. and they are spiritual kind of. They're very aware of the theory and the spirituality in lots of ways. But I have, yeah, my meeting and the friends I've made and support I get. I've been friends and connected to friends since 2012, and yeah, even though I give us as a society a lot of crap about what we should be doing, they still accept me and support me, which is pretty nice considering how critical I can be. And I love the work people try and do. And I'll never say to anyone like you're not doing enough because I don't know your circumstances or situations, but I am saying to us as a whole, as a community, what are we doing in this time of extreme violence and genocide and colonial climate collapse?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about like the peace testimony? I think that people think as of pacifism as passivity. And I'm curious.
Yeah, so I usually avoid the term pacifism myself because that implies doing nothing. And I also think it's very, the middle class does a lot of things. I'm knocking it a lot in this interview, but middle class people are often switched on. They're political. They know what's happening. But they can also gatekeep resources and gatekeep privilege in ways that they don't understand because that oppression is invisible. Like I'm pretty middle class. Like let's be honest. Like my life is pretty lucky and privileged, and I could probably struggling to get a job at the moment. But if I wanted to, I could probably go to housing units and work something out. Like just because of my class, the way I can talk, middle class anyway. So I think that the middle class kind of whiteness has definitely taken the peace testimony over for those of us in the West, and it's become about being polite. I've been to lots of rallies and protests and blockades where young people do get angry and they do shout at police and they do these things. And I don't condemn them. I don't see that as violent. I see the state and so-called Australia, well, the Australian state, as incredibly violent, as incredibly murderous and vindictive and vicious. And so when people who want to challenge that want to use any means necessary, I actually see that as part of the peace testimony because they're speaking up for the injustice, for the violence, for the hurt. And sometimes friends, at least in my experience, they sort of see both sides as equal or they want to condemn both sides. And I'm just like, that is not the reality of like, ripping babies away from families, which still happens in record numbers on this continent. People think the stolen generations, as it's called in Australia, is over. It is not. They call it welfare and all that, but if people had the resources to, so I think being polite about it is not the right way. Silence has its place, and a lot of friends will say, "Why can't we just silently protest?" I'm like, well, turn up and sit on the road and silently protest. That's absolutely fine. I'll probably join you. I don't like yelling. I find it a waste of energy, really. But I'm not going to condemn people who turn up fighting for our future and against injustice. I'm not going to condemn them. I'm going to say, good job. If you want to do property damage, like you're probably just going to go straight to jail and get caught. But if that's what you want to do, this thing is killing us. Of course it's okay. I just don't see that as a wise tactic, but people want to do it. And I'm more involved and interested in supporting people doing that stuff, even if they swear or they don't have the perfect politics. At least they're trying to be active in the face of oppression. And Quakers with our peace testimony, we tend to tap that, or from high we say that's no good. And then again, we also, instead of supporting people who are doing that work or saying, well, we'll come with you and we'll support you emotionally and maybe we can work together, they tend to separate or segregate from that and then just pay professionals to do the job, and the professionals are not doing the job. I don't know. So, maybe you're an exception. I don't know. Maybe in the States it's different, but I know on this continent, there's a million people in the NGO complex and they block change. The people Quakers are paying at the moment in Australia are blocking change just to justify their jobs. And that's what the peace testimony does. And I
Yeah.
just don't condemn that to say, oh, that's wrong and I'm right. I condemn that because it's a spiritual, I see it as a spiritual danger because it makes us feel like we're doing something when actually we're keeping the systems in place that are causing the damage. So the peace testimony for me is about being active, it's engaging, it's willing to admit sometimes that you're wrong, apologizing for the pain you've caused and going again, but it's about moving. And I think that's the main thrust of my article, that it's about taking movement. We can get too stuck in the system of being polite and peaceful, but we have to invest our talents and we have to take a step forward. And if we stumble, that's okay, because it's better to move and stumble than to die on your feet, I think, to die standing still. That's
Yeah.
how I feel. Yeah. Does
Yeah.
that answer that?
Great. Yeah, it does. Perfect.
Thanks.
There's people who are not doing anything. There's like the nonprofit industrial complex professionals. They're like the, nonviolent direct action, like action takers. What happens to the people kind of in between who are like want to take action, but are maybe not able to take as many risks as maybe you are?
Can you give me an example?
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like someone who is like at the same protest as you, but like has kids at home, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
I think like I personally know the answer to this, but like I'm like it's like, you just can do non-arrestable rules. But yeah, for people who are like, okay, Greg, you've activated me, like, but I still can't get arrested or something, like
Yeah.
what do you have for them?
I have a lot, but my main spiritual understanding is not to judge people. I don't know your story or what your abilities are. And that's the point that I think we fall into a trap of individualism. Like, I need to be the
Mm,
hero, or I can do it all, or I need to step up, when it's about community and what the community can do together. And that requires some people, I believe, to do the body in the way nonviolent resistance. So if you're in a position, I mean, personally, if I had sired children, I would probably be more keen to do things because I know how in danger their life is from in the next few decades, lack of food, lack of water, and fascist violence. Like, that's already happening now in the States and in places here on this continent and other parts around the world. So I would feel compelled more to fight. Like, your mortgage is not going to keep you safe from that. Your nice electric car is not going to keep your kids safe from that. Unfortunately, and then maybe that's the spiritual call of climate collapse, is like, this is it. Like, you have to act in faith, or that's the only option. And so the answer, I think, is in community. It would be great if Quaker meetings were more responsive to this, to say, okay, I'm a mother, I've got 3 kids, but I'm feeling called to take part in this action where we're going to blockade an oil pipeline or something like that. And the community saying, great, you might go to jail, but we've got you, and we'll pay your rent, or we'll pay your mortgage, or we can't afford that, but who's an elder you trust who can take care of your kids? Or, hopefully the elders are the ones whose kids are raised, would be going out and doing that, and the parents can support in other ways. But I would say it's about finding community. If you can't find community, I know that's really hard. Like, I've been lucky enough to connect with some great activists on this continent. But if you can't find community, just keep reaching out on going to protests and finding places and people who will do things with you. I would say in the time of genocide and what's happening with immigration in the States as well, like, it kind of feels to me like no one is safe. Even if you get a left-leaning president next time, the bar is being moved, and as resources become shorter and harder to get with the poly crisis, it's going to just keep getting worse. So I'd say now is the time to take risks, rather than waiting until fascism is fully in hold. And if that feels too much, just consider the consequences of our inaction. For me, I can't speak. I know in the States it's much harder. The judicial system is much harsher on activists. But for me, like, the risk of being arrested and jail and that kind of thing is much less compared to the risk of just, I couldn't be, I want to be safe, or I need to pay off my house first, or anything like. Country calls me to be more in line with my connections rather than with my wealth. And if I had children, I would probably feel 10 times more that way. But obviously, I know that's harder when you've got kids. And but I'd say the answer is in community. Then talk with other parents and see what you can manage. And there's lots of ways to disrupt things without necessarily getting arrested. And that's also avenues you can take. Yeah. But be
yeah,
disruptive. Slow down this death machine as best you can. That's what we need to do. And I think that's
yeah,
the spiritual nexus of Quakerism. Yeah.
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 Amazing. I think maybe my last question is, you talk about ancestors a lot, and given my understanding of maybe like they're First Nations people in Australia?
Yeah.
First Nations?
Yeah. I mean, I think the
Because that's
First
what they're called.
Nations, yeah. First
Yeah.
Nations in the
I was
US as
I
well.
Yeah, we use mostly like indigenous. I think like Canada uses the term First Nations more than we do. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just
Yeah.
just
All
like
good.
different. But I'm wondering like how your understanding of like ancestors is like different than maybe my understanding. Or are you just using it like in a way that
Yeah.
Western people use it as well?
Good question. It's hard. I mean, it's interesting. I always think about this in terms of how in quantum mechanics, etc., we talk about all time exists all at once. So when, in mob talk and First Nations talk, they talk about how, the old ones are with you, the ancestors are with, like they are. There's been times when particularly around Yagara country, which is Brisbane, where I've been in something hairy, and there's been times where I've just stood on the ground and I'm like, I don't want to get arrested today. And I haven't been. And this particular, I'm sorry for telling an anecdote to answer this, but because I might have talked too
Please.
much already. Okay.
No,
So
you have not
there's,
talked too much.
okay, thank you. There's a company called Electronic Operating Systems, EOS, which gets a lot of Australian government money, and they've built weapons which have gone to the war that's happening in Yemen, which has killed a lot of people, and now to the war on Gaza, the genocide in Palestine. And it's all government money, and they've built some really horrendous machines and surveillance systems. But back before this particular phase of the genocide in Gaza started, I was really interested in them, and some people in Australia done research on how bad they are. So they had an office not far from where I was living in this house where I got raided last year. So I just went down on my own. I tried to get a few people, but no one wanted to come. So I just went down on my own with the sign saying something on the lines of EOS funds genocides or EOS funds war. And I put on, because I was going on my own, I put on my little, we've got little vests that say Quakers for Peace. And I got there and it was all completely open. So I thought I can just go into the building and go, because I shared the office. And I went right to the EOS office door. And I just stood outside the door. I didn't try to go in the office. I was on my own. Anyway, they got really angry with me, the workers, you're trespassing. I was like, sure, whatever. Eventually the police came. And I was like, oh, maybe I should have left. But before that, I just stood on the ground outside. I stood and I was just like, please, please, ancestors, I don't want to get arrested today. And I just had this sense, like, you're not going to get arrested today. Today's going to be okay. Like, it's like, come on, please be with me. And the first thing that the cop did when he came in, he saw my Quakers. He's like, you're a Quaker. And I'm like, yes. And he goes, oh, my grandparents were rescued by Quakers from the Holocaust. Like, they only got out of Germany because of some Quakers smuggled them out. So, well, yeah, that's great. That's kind of some of the things we do, and I'm doing the same thing here. It's just for people. In particular, I was interested in Yemen at the time, but Australia had a large role in. And this is what I'm doing just for people in Yemen who we're murdering at the moment with our taxpayer money. And it's like, oh yeah, and then we had a sort of a chat about the Holocaust and violence for a while. And then on his little iPad thing, he looked up my name, and by this time, I already had quite a large record. He got really annoyed at me. I think and him and the other cop, and they were talking for ages about what to do with me. And the manager of EOS came out and said, you have to arrest him. Like, we don't want people here. And I was just like, can I just go? I'll just go if that's all right. Like, I'm on my own. I just wanted to say something to this company. And this officer was really like, no, you can't go. You're going to be arrested for trespass. And then he looked at my Quakers of Peace. And after about half an hour of me just sweating, holding the sign, like, eventually he said, just go. Don't come back inside this building again. And I went. And I think that was like a combination of like, there were elders from country with me from Yagara, and there was the Quaker ancestry from whatever happened in the Holocaust during World War II. Someone there,
Yeah.
their actions reached out through time in some way. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's very real
Mm.
and is there if we can sort of get in sync with it and listen to it. And sometimes that'll keep you safe, and sometimes that'll put you in situations where physically you might be in danger, but spiritually it's safer than standing still. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question, but I reckon that's a pretty good story that
Yeah.
sums it up for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question. So when I was reading your article, and this is like when you brought up how you were abused, when I read about the pink unicorn, I was like, oh, I want Greg to read this. And I was like, oh, do I actually? Because then like, is that too much? Like I was like, is that too much to put on the podcast? And I feel like I because it's so visually striking. Like it's like they took a child's toy and put on a spike, and I'm like, Australian police did that? Sounds crazy. But I've been thinking about like what happened. I don't know if you know about Mahmoud Khalil in the United States, the Columbia student who's Palestinian and, got kidnapped basically. But it's like
Yeah.
it is, and maybe it is we're having an effect, right, of the Westminster raid of like they wouldn't be doing these things unless they were actually scared.
Absolutely.
But it's just like, I don't really know what my question is, but I guess it's like I just like wanted to notice that I was like, oh, we shouldn't talk about the pink unicorn on the podcast,
Yeah, yeah,
even though it's a reality, it's happening. Like it's so maybe
yeah,
tell me about the pink unicorn, and then
yeah.
yeah,
So this came. We were in I can't remember whose country it is. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've been there, but First Nations land in what we call the Blue Mountains. And this was going to be Blockade Australia's, I think it was going to be our fourth mobilisation. And it was the one we built the other three towards to say, come to Sydney, get on the streets with us in these dates. But before that, we had a camp and we'd taken extreme security measures around technological phones, that kind of thing, to stay off the radar. This was a place where the people who owned it welcomed us, invited us. We were staying in our cars or in tents, and it was a lot of really hard work, and it was amazing to all be in one place. And like I say in the article, my first hint that something was up was someone was flying a drone out on the road, and this is very steep, hilly mountain country. You don't just go and fly drones there. And I knew from previous stuff that drones mean police. That just does. So I sort of knew something was up. But before I could think about what to do, like I was literally having my morning coffee. It was early in the morning. A kerfuffle sort of broke out in camp, and what had happened, I found out later, was people were practicing another action down the road, and they'd spotted in this very dense, steep hills. They'd spotted two people in camouflage who were observing us and taking photos, and walked up to them and said, "Hey, who are you? Are you okay?" And these two people ran down the hill into our camp, and this unmarked police car came zooming in through the camp, picked the two up, and then took off. The problem was when they took off, we knew that was a dead end road. There's no way out for them. So they came back through, and someone, and at the time I was just panicking, like I didn't know it was police. They didn't identify themselves. They didn't have insignia on. And I was actually, maybe I'm too Americanized, but I was thinking, is this some kind of local right wing militia or something? I don't know. Like I didn't know. In all honesty, but someone had blocked the road on a very narrow causeway, so there's no way around it. And the police stopped, and that's what instigated the raid. Like we did stop the car, we did demand identification, we did, and they just locked the doors. There was nothing to say they were police. And from that, the 200 odd police came, and this was called in Sydney Police. It's called the Raptor Guard, and they are built. They are naturally and probably chemically built very, very big. They're very intimidating. They were put in when everyone, the media likes to go on in Australia about bikie violence and gang violence. So they were put in for that, and they came in their hundreds onto our property, and they kicked us off. We all didn't have a place to go by the time us, by the time they released us, it was late in the evening, and we had children, we had elders, and they were, no, you just can't stay here tonight. So a lot of us slept under a bridge just down the road, and it was winter, it was freezing. And then we had to, a few days later, we were told we'd go back because some people left cars, equipment. About 20 people had been arrested, so all their stuff was still there and had been, the police had just gone through it all. And one of the things that one of the kids who were staying there, they had this little, it's like a stick with a unicorn's head, and you can run around up and down the road on it. It's pretty fun. And what they had done is they cut the head off and taken the stuffing out, because some of it had a body as well. They'd taken the stuffing out, and they'd placed the head on a spike, like another piece of wood, out front of our kitchen space, which was our main communal space. And it was a way for the police to say, well, what's a polite way of swearing? That, up yours. We win, we've got
yeah,
you, and this kind of thing. So it was pure intimidation,
right,
pure violence. Well, not pure violence with broken fingers, but pure psychological, thing. And
yeah,
yeah, it was
yeah,
horrifying.
yeah,
I mean, I wasn't surprised. I would have been through a lot. I know what police are and what they mean. They're not there to keep you safe. They're there to keep you controlled. But I think for people like yourself and other people who've heard about this, they're just shocked. I'm just like, this is just what police do. Like, this is, as I indicate in the article, they were formed on this continent to kill First Nations people. That was their original job, and it hasn't really changed since. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Not as fun a story about a unicorn as I would have liked.
No, but it's good. I mean, yeah, I think, the opening of your article, I was like, okay, like by now we think the cops are bad, right? Like we all agree that cops are bad. And like
Yeah,
even knowing, like even me who I like, have witnessed police violence and like I have, I'm,
yeah.
cab, but like
Sure.
But then like and then I, reading with the pink unicorn, I'm like, oh, right. But I like still like, even after all that, I still expect them to follow the rules, which I'm like, right. No, of course they don't. Like,
No, they don't. Yeah.
yeah, it's just, yeah.
They,
And it's like,
they do whatever they can get
even if
away
I
with.
like tell myself, right, right. And it's like, even if
Yeah.
I tell myself that I'm like, of course they don't follow the rules, they're the cops. But then like, I'm actually confronted with them not following the rules. And I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
no. Yeah. Just just like an interesting like thing to
Yeah.
notice in myself.
Well, and maybe for anyone who, if this gets out, but anyone who's listening, just to notice that, if the police are someone you feel safe or they are respectful, they're nice, that probably means there's spiritual work to be done there on your privilege. Individually, I accept that some people within police are not all involved in this, and that spiritually, I'm called to individually respect like individuals without their uniform on. But also, as an institution, once the uniforms are on, this is not a safe organization. This is not a safe. And if you feel like they bring you safety or comfort, it's probably because they're protecting your privilege. And your privilege is coming at the expense of country and at the expense of what we call the poor, people who are being exploited all across the globe. And is that, as people who have peace testimonies and simplicity testimonies, is that where we really want to sit with our lives? Is that where we really want to get our comfort? Check your spiritual self, and I will as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's great. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay. My final question is just, is there anything that you want to say or anything I didn't touch on that you want to touch on?
Be scared but act. That can be in all forms, whether you are going to sit in the driveway and block a weapons company. But it also means talking about the privilege and things, even if you don't fully understand it. I don't fully understand the violence and privilege and how it affects my lives or how it affects your meeting's life, because it does. It affects it. If you're from any privilege, and most of us in the West are, especially go to Quakers, don't be scared to talk about it or challenge it, and trust your guts, because people with respectability and maybe elders, they will subconsciously protect their privilege. Don't be scared about it. I mean, I've had to say some pretty strong words recently to Australian Quakers about the way we do peace, the Quaker Peace and Legislation Committee. And it's scary. I don't want to start arguments or get into it, but also my privilege means that I have a responsibility to protect the interests of those who are exploited against people who may want to gatekeep and channel resources back into the upper middle class just because they can. Like, that's not acceptable in our poly crisis and in our spiritual. So be scared, but act anyway. And if you get it wrong, it's better to get it wrong and talk to your community about accountability than it is to not act. 100%. And that's the nutshell of the parable of the talents, I believe.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah,
Thanks, Mish.
I like that peace testimony is not about getting it right all the time. Because
That's stagnant. That's the
yeah,
stagnant piece, like we want the free flowing river, refreshing, we want we want the rapids and the nice calm bits, but then, fall down the rapids again and the turbulent stuff. That's peace. That's peace in a time when the top 15% of the world steals $2 trillion a year, at least from the bottom bottom 80%. That's the numbers according to BJ Prashad. Like, we steal so much. So there's no room for, polite peace, only active peace. Yeah.
Renewal is a perpetual part of like a healthy organization. Having healthy processes by which we evaluate where we're at and connect to what's going on around us, and in a way that's adaptive and responsive to our living reality. My name is Jade Rockwell. Pronouns are she, her. I live in Richmond, Indiana, and I am one of the pastors at West Elkton Friends Meeting in West Elkton, Ohio. Quakerism itself is, started as a revival or renewal process for Christianity at a time when some folks were feeling like the existing church wasn't possible to reform. Things were hard in a lot of ways. Friends started getting the attention of the government and the fact that they were very engaged with and responsive to the social realities of their world and really saw their faith as pertinent to that was very threatening to the powers that be. We went through a period of persecution, and that persecution changed a lot of the approach and the ways that we were doing things. Then we kind of got into the quietest period. We turned a lot more inward, a lot more individual, and the Society for Friends became much more insular. So the idea that you would sit and wait to be totally clear that something is from God before you would do anything in action is something that was very important to the quietists, important for survival, to not make a misstep. It was also important because of their theology, which emphasized purity of action. Theologically, our emphasis has shifted in the 21st century more towards we are a people called to action. We're living in a time when we can see that inaction is risky. If we're not able to respond to our world, bad things can happen. And we may be morally responsible if we aren't able to be responsive and active. The difficulties with attracting young people is the sort of sense that friends aren't able to act in a responsive way to the world. And sometimes people may say, well, that's the Quaker way. The Quaker way is slow. But I think if we look at our history, that's not the only Quaker way. Abolition is something that we remember as a time when God moved us in a good direction. Embodying our faith in action is also the Quaker way, and we may need to lean more into that. So Quaker Connect is a new project of FWCC America's Friends World Committee for Consultation. We're working with monthly meetings and local churches to engage in practices together and in our local communities that connect us more deeply and more relationally to our neighbors, as well as connecting to the wider Quaker tradition through these cross-cultural relationships. We do that through doing experiments, trying to carve out space where our meetings can take their risk of trying something that they don't know how it will turn out and know that they'll be safe, and that at the end of it, we can go back to the way we did things before if we want to, but maybe we won't want to. I think one of the things that our meetings and churches have struggled with as they get more mature in their life cycle is how do you still hold space for that present action of the Holy Spirit? That's becoming harder and harder because our world is moving at such a fast rate now. It's like we're being bombarded with all of these conditions. How do you be responsive enough to deal with that even on a personal level? So we need to find practices in our meetings that allow us to do that. And ideally, we want to do that in balance with the practices that also provide some stability and infrastructure for our meetings to continue over generations. We provide meetings with spiritual accompaniment through the process. They support the meeting as an outside and neutral person who can help that discernment stay grounded in the spirit and in what's authentic to who that meeting is. When we don't exercise our activity, we start to feel more and more safe in inaction. This stagnation that we experience is not unique to Quakers, right? This is a very human thing. This is something that we experience in lots of areas of human life, but maybe particularly in human institutions. That our institutions tend to calcify with time. Sometimes they reactively shut down creative solutions or innovations that may actually be the way forward. But one of the amazing things that institutions can do is that if they figure out a way to hold space for that creativity and innovation in life to continue, they can actually live a lot longer than any of us can. And that could be pretty powerful and a pretty good way for God to work in our world over generations.
That was Jade Rockwell from the Quaker Speak video, Transforming Quakerism in Troubling Times. A big thank you to Layla Cuthrell for filming and editing these videos. You can watch them on YouTube or quakerspeak.com. Jade mentioned the Quaker Connect program. It's a resource for meetings and churches looking to build deeper involvement in their communities. You can learn more at quakerconnect.org.
You also heard Greg Rolls talking about and reading from his article, We Are Having an Effect, The Necessity of Spiritual Resistance in Climate and Justice Activism. It appears in the September 2025 issue of Friends Journal and at friendsjournal.org.
My conversation with Greg came at the perfect time. I've been struggling lately with our troubling times. I'm angry at the current administration for stripping rights away from immigrants, trans children, and the people in Gaza, and so many others. And even little things can set off my anger right now, like when cars park in the bike lane and I want to scream at them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of us feel outraged right now. The Quaker peace testimony isn't about shutting down the anger, though. It's about acknowledging it and allowing it to transform into something else. In the August 2025 issue of Friends Journal, Wendy Cooler reviewed Richard Rohr's new book. It's called The Tears of Things, Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage. Rohr starts with those famously angry Hebrew prophets like Amos and Jeremiah.
Right, the ones who are always shouting about injustice. And Rohr points out something that we often miss. Their anger matures into grief. Rohr suggests that the prophetic path isn't about being right, but about empathy. It's not about standing apart and judging, it's about suffering with the world. The book is The Tears of Things, Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage. It's written by Richard Rohr and published by Convergent Books. You can read more of Wendy Cooler's review at friendsjournal.org. Peterson, you also have a recommendation for us.
That's correct. This season, in addition to the book review we share with you, our listeners, we're going to also share a non-book recommendation. So today, I have a game for you. Fate of the Fellowship. It's a brand new cooperative board game designed by Matt Laycock. He's the creator of the very popular and award-winning cooperative game Pandemic. In Fate of the Fellowship, players step into J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. They guide the Fellowship while resisting the growing shadow. It's story-rich, strategic, and you win or lose together. That's what makes it cooperative. You can find Fate of the Fellowship at Fantasy Flight Games, on Board Game Geek, and through most major game retailers. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Quakers Today. If you liked what you heard today and you listen to our show on Spotify or Apple Podcast or YouTube videos, please take a moment to rate and review. Make Sweet Miche and me very happy by sharing Quakers Today with your friends and on your social media. Quakers Today is written and produced by me, Peterson Toscano.
And me, Sweet Miche. Music on today's show comes from Epidemic Sound.
Season 5 of Quakers Today is sponsored by Friends Fiduciary. Friends Fiduciary combines Quaker values with expert investment management. They serve more than 460 organizations with ethical portfolios, shareholder advocacy, and a deep commitment to justice and sustainability. Friends Fiduciary blends Quaker principles with smart, mission-driven investing. With 100% of revenue supporting their mission and a 100% Quaker board, they help hundreds of faith-based groups invest ethically and affordably. Learn more at friendsfiduciary.org.
This season is also sponsored by American Friends Service Committee. AFSC works at the forefront of social change to meet urgent needs, challenge injustice, and build peace. Did you know AFSC helped thousands of Jewish and non-Jewish refugees during World War II to resettle in the U.S.? Today, AFSC works towards a future where everyone can thrive, has access to legal status, and is safe from detention and deportation. Learn how you can take action for immigrant safety, dignity, and well-being at afsc.org/stronger-immigrants.
Visit quakerstoday.org to see our show notes and a full transcript of this episode, and check out the extended video of today's episode on the Friends Journal YouTube page. And if you stick around after the closing, you're going to hear listeners' responses to the question, what is your favorite Quaker term or phrase? Something common among friends, but odd to outsiders.
Thank you, friends, for listening. May you have clarity and courage as you engage with the world. In a moment, you will hear listeners' voicemails about common phrases among Quakers. They may be odd to outsiders. But first, we'll share the question for next month. Quaker gatherings often provide spaces for the spiritual needs of affinity groups. This includes spaces for friends of color or young adult friends.
Or the community I've been a part of for years. It's FLGBTQC. Say that fast. FLGBTQC. It stands for Friends for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Concerns. Okay, so here is the question. How has being rooted in a small group changed the way you share your voice in bigger settings? And it doesn't have to be a Quaker group, just any kind of small group that it just was supportive that way.
Yeah. And to respond, you can leave a voice memo with your name and the town where you live. The number to call is 317 Quakers. That's 317-782-5377. 317 Quakers. And +1 if calling from outside the USA. You can also send us an email, which is podcast@friendsjournal.org. I have these contact details in our show notes over at quakerstoday.org.
Now we hear answers to the question, what is your favorite Quaker term that is common among friends but strange to outsiders? In social media, Amy Ward Brimmer wrote, way opens, or way will open, obviously. And we also received the following voicemails.
My name is Eleanor. I'm calling from Colorado, and I'm fairly new to Quakers and still learning the lingo, but my favorite Quaker jargon is friend with a capital F. I've struggled with road rage, and before I found Quakerism, something that really helped me overcome that and have more peaceful experiences in traffic was a comment from the internet that suggested calling people that are cutting you off buddy instead of cursing them. When I found Quakerism and I learned about the friend, I felt like that was a framework that I could apply beyond the road to other areas of my life and to think of all people as a friend or a buddy. So thank you, friends. I really enjoy the show, and I'm looking forward to learning more jargon in your next episode. My dog was whining a little bit there, so hopefully that didn't disrupt the entire voicemail. But she's very sweet and happy, and she just saw a squirrel. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
My name is Ken. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania. My favorite Quaker term is, quote, there is that of God in everyone, unquote.
Tom Hoban, Rhode Island, Quaker and Episcopalian. My favorite Quaker saying is, I will hold you in the light. I will hold you in the light. I often use that. Many people say, I'll pray for you. And some take offense, but I think that's a beautiful image. Thank you so much. Enjoying your podcast.
Thanks to everyone who sent in the voicemails. They're my favorite. I love the voicemails a lot. And you have a chance to do it again with our next question. Miche, what is our question for next month?
Our question for next month is, how has being rooted in a small group changed the way you share your voice in bigger settings?
Yeah, let us know. Find out all the details at quakerstoday.org.